Today is October 7, 2025. My name is Rob Carr of Kalamazoo Right to Life. This is Pro-Life Week. Well, I see that today is the second anniversary of that horrific attack by Hamas on innocent Israelis in southern Israel, which has obviously resulted in a two-year war between Israel and the terrorist group Hamas in Gaza. And maybe we're coming closer to some kind of a resolution with Hamas, maybe negotiating with Trump on like a prisoner release to finally end this war. But time will tell how or if Hamas is going to capitulate on this issue. Got a few things today. First, I saw on lifenews.com, source that I go to quite frequently, there was an article talking about euthanasia in Canada. And I think we've all known that Canada legalized physician-assisted suicide several years ago. But I was stunned to see how many people actually had been euthanized since the law took effect. I'll look at some details here. The law is called Medical Assistance in Dying, or MAID, M-A-I-D. And it was initially for people whose death was reasonably foreseeable. And the very first year, and that was in 2016, that it became legal in Canada. And before I go any further, by comparison, Canada's population is about 41 million people, compared to the U.S., whose population is estimated in 2024 to be 340 million. So, 40 million, 340 million. We're obviously far larger in population. So the numbers I'm going to throw out here are staggering when you compare them to U.S. military deaths in the Vietnam War. And I know for some of you, maybe the Vietnam War is only something you read about in history books. But during the mid-1960s to early 1970s, the Vietnam was a huge political landmine for American presidents and for Congress. And the American public was up in arms over Vietnam policy. It was a huge issue, huge. And let me go to those right now. In the peak years, the Vietnam War, for all practical purposes, was from 1955 to 1975. But U.S. involvement really didn't kick in a large way until 1964, and really took effect in 1965. And that lasted until the early 1970s, when we were disengaging from the war, or from Vietnam, and fatalities declined correspondingly. In 1965, the first big year of fatalities, we had 1,863 deaths that year. And that jumped in 1966 to 6,143. Then in 1967 was 11,153. So it jumped into double digits in only 2 years' time. Then the peak year was 1968, 16,592 deaths. In 1968. It fell off to 11,600 in 1969, and then back to 6,081 in 1970, and then in 1971, 2,357. So the peak years, 1966 to 1970, were 51,585 deaths, U.S. Military deaths. And that really did affect public policy. At first, Americans supported the war, but then when they saw these huge numbers, 11,000, 16,000, 11,000, the American public turned against the war, by and large. Primarily, college students, young people, people who were of draft age. They very much opposed to the war. So the peak year, 1968, 16,600 deaths. Okay, now let's look at, and this is from a population at that time. The United States' population was about 250 million people. Now here, look at Canada's euthanasia deaths. In 2016, the first year started in June. By the end of the year, 1,018 people had been euthanized. In 2017, that doubled, almost tripled, 2,838. In 2018, 4,493. In 1919, 5,600. In 2020, 7,600. In 2021, double digits, 10,100. 2022, 13,200. 23, 15,343. And the estimated number for last year of 2024, 16,600 euthanized Canadians. So compare that to that peak year of 1968 in the U.S., the Vietnam War, 16,000 deaths, combat deaths. Canada, euthanasia policy, 16,600. Almost identical numbers in a country that has 10% of our population. Their total euthanasia deaths for the 9 years it's been legal, 76,800 people. In the United States, in the peak 9 years from 1965 to 1973, 56,000. So our Vietnam War combat deaths has been exceeded by Canadian doctors euthanizing these victims, and they are victims. And in Canada in 2021, they amended the law to include those suffering from a grievous condition whose death was not reasonably foreseeable. Originally, it was if the death was reasonably foreseeable. Now it's for deaths that are not reasonably foreseeable, but still in a grievous condition. So the article says, Canada has crossed the line that we never thought possible. By the end of 2024, 16,500 deaths that represented 5% of all deaths in the country. And we have seen in the last several years how Canada, which supposedly is based on Judeo-Christian values and culture, has fallen off the cliff when it comes to some of these basic human rights, and how Canadian doctors are violating their Hippocratic Oath. What's the Hippocratic Oath say? To do no harm. Wow. How much harm is being done when you euthanize a person who needs to die with dignity, but not dignity by a pill, but by natural death. Okay. Second item, I saw that on Friday, the Food and Drug Administration approved a generic version of the abortion pill mifepristone. Apparently, this is the second generic drug. I wasn't aware there was the first one. Now, Caroline Leavitt, press secretary for the White House, said that this is not changing U.S. policy on the abortion pills. This is by law permitted because the initial drug, mifepristone, had reached its 25-year patent expiration date. And now legally other companies could apply for their own generic version. I'm not saying I agree with anything she said, but apparently because of that patent expiring, other companies legally had the right to do this. And I'm still hoping that the courts will step in and say the FDA erred initially by not engaging in proper and correct protocols to protect the safety of patients taking mifepristone, because apparently 10 to 15% of all women taking the drugs have experienced severe medical complications when they are expelling their unborn child in a chemical abortion. Okay. Last item, I don't want to forget this. March for Life, Thursday, November 6th, 2025. So it's coming up in about a month. There is still room on the bus for the Kalamazoo Right to Life bus, leaving from the Kalamazoo First Assembly parking lot, 5550 Oakland Drive in Portage. Bus is leaving about 8:30 in the morning, and the rally begins really around 11 o'clock. The march begins at noon, so the first hour you'll be hearing speakers and people giving motivational talks about being pro-life. A short march at noon. We come back to the Capitol building. Sorry, I forgot to mention this. The rally takes place in front of the Capitol building in Lansing. That's an important note. In front of the Capitol building in Lansing. We come back from our walk. Our bus will pick us up, take us back to the First Assembly parking lot where your car will be parked. Bring a sack lunch. We'll eat it on the bus on the return trip. We'll supply bottled water. It's $20 per person, $50 if you're going to bring your whole family. So there's a discount for multiple children. Go onto the Kalamazoo Right to Life website. It's KAZOORTL.org. You go on the homepage, you'll see a QR code. You'll see information about the rally. You hit that, you'll see a QR code on the following page. You click that, and it'll take you to a secure site where you can buy a seat on that bus for as many people as you want to include in your group. This is important. The March for Life. We need to have a good showing from pro-lifers all across the state, but in particular from Kalamazoo County. We need you there to support our pro-life lawmakers. They are still facing a hostile governor's office, of course, from Gretchen Whitmer, but we're still facing a hostile state Senate that is still controlled by pro-abortion Democrats. And the midterms next year will make a huge difference in if we can get a pro-life legislature, to shut down and the governor's race is next year. So everything is changing next year. Everything is changing. We may have a pro-life governor and a pro-life attorney general and a pro-life secretary of state and a pro-life state house and state senate. I mean, we can see some bills enacted that can get around the edges from that Prop 3 that destroyed all our pro-life laws. But we need a pro-life legislature working with a pro-life governor. So March for Life, November 6th. It's a Thursday. We leave at 8:30 in the morning. Go to the Kalamazoo Right to Life website, sign up, get your seat secure so you're not scrambling to find your own way to get to Lansing. There's still plenty of seats available on the bus. Be there for the March for Life that is being sponsored here locally by Kalamazoo Right to Life. With that, I'll let you go, and I'll see you next time.